This is what the violent sport of sumo looks like. Two gigantic men slam their heads into each other and then slap and push with all their might until one of them is jettisoned off the clay platform. It's a brutal human car crash that often leaves the wrestlers dazed, bloody, and injured. But this is also what sumo looks like. A match can end within a few seconds of starting if anything other than the bottom of their feet touches the ground. This opens up techniques and styles that are totally opposite of the head-first approach we witnessed earlier. But these strategies aren't always appreciated by sumo purists. Some spectators feel robbed if they don't get to see a big impact at the tachi. Winning like this can feel almost cheap or easy. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at a rikishi in the top division who makes use of these winning techniques, so that hopefully we can learn to appreciate the subtle tactics and footwork that make them possible. Perhaps we'll see that sumo is a lot more of a chess match than you might have realized. Let's learn more about this 6'3", 362-pound Mongolian with the light blue mawashi. His name is Oshoma, and heading into the November Basho, he's ranked at Mega Shira 4. The winning technique he primarily uses is called a hatakikomi, which simply put is just slapping down on the back, neck, or shoulders of the opponent to force him down. Oshoma has 45 victories by hatakikomi, which accounts for almost 34% of his total wins as a professional. Compare that to the overall rate amongst all rikishi of just under 9%, and you can see that Oshoma uses these techniques a whole lot more than most others. While hatakikomi covers a broad range of slapdown techniques, I want to focus on ones where he pulls or slaps down on his opponent's neck, because there's actually an interesting crossover here with Japan's Olympic wrestling team. If you're not aware, Japan absolutely dominated wrestling in the 2024 Paris Olympics, winning a total of 8 gold medals. My good friend and brilliant combat sports analyst Ryan Wagner wrote a very detailed article about the deeply technical hand fighting system that the Japanese freestyle wrestling team used to help them bring so many gold medals back to the land of the rising sun. You can find that article on his Substack, Mixing the Martial Arts. Check out the link in the description below, and while you're at it, might as well hit the like button. It was this article that made me aware of this potential crossover between freestyle and sumo wrestling techniques. In describing part of their hand fighting system, Ryan says, "One of the primary downsides to this kind of looser, more mobile style is that it doesn't afford constant control of the head and posture the way heavy collar ties do. But Japan's wrestlers still make liberal use of snapdowns. Their snaps just come in motion and through hand fighting transitions rather than constant head pressure." Now, I find it very interesting that the Japanese freestyle wrestling team happened to develop this rather unique approach to wrestling when their national sport of sumo, that has been around for hundreds of years, already contains wrestlers who utilize a similar, long-range hand-fighting style that also makes liberal use of snapdowns in transition. But what we'll see is that while in freestyle wrestling these snapdowns are primarily a way to set up other scoring techniques, in sumo, where you can lose just by touching the ground with anything other than the bottom of your feet, snapdowns become a way to win. Now let's get back to Oshoma to see how he manages to win so often with these snapdown or hatakikomi techniques. It all starts at the tachi, the initial charge. While the two rikishi squat directly in front of each other and line up their charge, Oshoma often steps slightly off the center line during the initial engagement. This takes him away from some of the forward momentum of his opponent and puts him off on an angle. The results of this angle is that the space the opponent was going to charge into is now empty. Now, by grabbing behind the neck while he continues to circle away, he can pull his opponent down into that void, using the forward momentum against him and causing him to fall forward. Let's look at another example of how he uses his footwork to set up his hatakikomi. Here, Oshoma initially steps off to his right at the tachi, but when his opponent adjusts to turn and face him, Oshoma then quickly adjusts to step away in the other direction. As before, he grabs on the back of the head as he's circling away from his opponent, but he needs to get his leg out of the way to fully empty out the space his opponent is moving into, so he retracts his leg as he's pulling his opponent down. Again, Oshoma moves off to the right at the tachi, but notice this time how he wraps over the top of his opponent's left arm. This will make it more difficult for the opponent to turn to face him. Still, his opponent flings his arm free, but Oshoma is ready to change angles yet again. Now he darts off to his left and brings his right arm up to slap down while he circles away. Time and time again, we see how Oshoma's footwork is really the critical component of his offense. He moves off to the right at the tachiai again, and quickly circles left after his opponent turns to face him. This time though, his opponent adjusts to face him a second time. Oshoma is undeterred though, and moves quickly to get himself away from the edge. His opponent gives chase, but again, Oshoma finds a hatakikomi in transition, sliding away and pulling down. This works so well because the opponent is often leaning his weight forward to generate as much pushing force as possible. The combination of the hatakikomi with his retreating footwork uses that forward-leaning posture against his opponent. While these opportunities usually come at long range when both rikishi lack any secure grips on their opponent, any brief moment of transition can create openings for the hatakikomi. Oshoma gets off to the right and wraps up the left arm again. When his opponent yanks his arm free, that creates a transition and therefore an opportunity. Oshoma slaps down and pivots out, off-balancing the opponent and getting him to touch down with his hand. This time, Oshoma is looking for a grip on the mawashi at the tachiai, but his opponent pushes him off and blocks his grip. Again, this creates a transition, so Oshoma uses that to find his chance to slap the opponent's head down. These transitions come when an opponent is trying to close the distance on Oshoma as well. Here he knows his opponent is looking for a chance to get inside and get grips on the mawashi, so as soon as he sees the distance start to collapse, Oshoma yanks him down when he's reaching out for grips. Now Oshoma is not just waiting for his opponents to try to close the distance so that he can counter with his hatakikomi. Rather, we'll see how he uses his pushes, thrusts, and frames to force a long distance before stripping those away quickly to allow the opponent to fall into the trap of his hatakikomi. Here, Oshoma uses the Nadowa throat thrust to push his opponent off. When the Nadowa gets broken, this lets the opponent bring his weight forward. But of course, Oshoma is waiting for that, so he reaches out to pull down on the neck while backstepping. By using his frames and thrusts like this, it's like he's offering his opponent a chair to sit in and then yanking it out from under them when they go to plop down onto it. He can also just directly transition from thrusting on the throat with his arm to pulling down on the back of the neck when he feels his opponent leaning into his frame. Another way that Oshoma sets up the hatakikomi is with his slaps, quickly switching from slapping his opponent in the face to slapping down on the back of their neck. Now, while sometimes these tactics can bring a swift end to the match, sometimes Oshoma has to chain pushing and pulling attacks to keep the opponent guessing. Here, Oshoma scoots off to the side at the tachiai and wraps up the left arm with what's called a Russian tie in freestyle wrestling. He starts to use that to circle around his opponent, but when the arm is yanked out, Oshoma immediately switches to pushing on the chest. But the push is a distraction and setup for the snapdown. His opponent is able to keep his balance and regain his posture, so Oshoma goes back to pushing again. But yet again, when the opponent starts to lean forward to resist the thrust, Oshoma switches to the hatakikomi, and on the second attempt, it's successful. This is where you can start to see that the hatakikomi isn't just a move for Oshoma, but it's built into a system of offense that mixes up pushing and pulling threats in a way that leaves opponents confused. They have to resist the pushes to avoid getting thrust out, but struggling too hard against getting pushed opens them up to quick snapdowns. It's important to note that Oshoma leverages his height well with these tactics, so he has particularly favorable matchups against shorter rikishi. Take for example his several victories over 5'6" Enho. Enho is certainly used to fighting with a height and weight disadvantage, but Oshoma is particularly a tough matchup because not only can he keep Enho on the outside with his reach, but even when Enho manages to close the distance, Oshoma quickly forces him down with the hatakikomi. Despite all of the skill Oshoma can demonstrate with his snapdowns, I think a lot of the distaste among entrenched sumo fans for these techniques comes from his frequent use of them at the tachiai. There are lots of times where a quick hatakikomi doesn't look too different from a henka, which remains the most controversial move in sumo. And, as we mentioned earlier, it makes sense why this move is effective. The tachiai is generally when both wrestlers agree to charge full force into each other. That involves both wrestlers leaning all their weight into their charge. It's supposed to be a head-on collision between two bulls, but Oshoma often plays the matador instead, avoiding most of the contact and exposing the opening that it creates to get an easy win. But even in these instances, I've tried to demonstrate that there are subtle tactics involved that make it look easier than it is. Another example of this is how Oshoma often utilizes a quick slap at the tachiai to force his opponent's head to the side, where he can then pull it down with the other hand while circling to the opposite side. If that's still not enough for you to appreciate his style, consider that a good hatakikomi can also send opponents flying in a manner similar to our favorite judo style throws we see in sumo all the time. Still, you don't have to love Oshoma's style, but sumo isn't just a competition of who is the biggest and strongest. It's also a contest of skill and strategy, where a cunning and deceptive move can end the match just as quickly as a full force frontal charge.